Hey guys, welcome to your 9th ActionScript 3 game development tutorial. Today we're going to be taking a look at what are called classes, which will allow us to do all sorts of cool stuff, especially with functions. So I already deleted the other functions that we wrote last time, but we're going to delete everything inside main as well. And today we're not even going to be doing too much in main. Like, main's not going to be our main focus point. Ha ha ha. We're going to create what's called a new class flower. Okay, let me do that slower. Okay, so you right click on source. I'm so used to just going ahead and doing it. You're gonna go down to add, and you're gonna do new class. Okay, you don't need to worry about any of this information here. You just need to type in a name, and we're going to do flower. Typically, when you were to read a book on learning to program with what's called object-oriented programming, which is what we're doing, when you create new classes, they will start off with what's it called? Animals. So you'll usually create a dog and a cat, and then an animal class. But I want to do flowers. Okay, flowers are cool. So I'm just gonna delete that because I don't like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to create this flower right here. Okay, so we can already go back to main, and what we're actually going to do is if you take this tab, flower, and you pull down, while you're still holding onto it with the mouse, still clicked, you can drag it to there and you can have both of them up at the same time, which is super, super useful because we're going to be using both of these classes. It's just main's only going to be doing stuff for us. So if you ever want to use something in your program, it's got to be called from main or something that main calls. All right, everything gets connected back to main. That's where your program starts. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new flower. So we're going to call it F1, which is a flower, and we're going to make it equal to new flower. Because class, we have to create a new instance of it. If we just did flower, it's null. It's equal to null. So if you're ever having problems with arrays or variables where it says trying to use a null instance, it's basically saying, hey, you never called null, you never actually created it, you've got a problem. So there's a couple different things that we can do from here. So let's just start off with basics right here. So this right here is creating a new flower. It's saving it into a new variable of the type flower called F1. And the new here basically calls what's called the constructor. And the constructor is a function that does not have a return type. It also has the same name as the class. So what we can do is we can do trace flower created. And when we run it, it says flower created. Super simple. Yeah, I don't know what more to say. So now if we created var f2, which would be a flower is equal to new flower, it would also call that. Okay, so now we have two of them. Let's create different types of flowers now. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to add an argument to the default constructor, and it's going to make it not a default constructor. A default constructor is a constructor that has no arguments. You don't really need to memorize that quite yet. ActionScript will give you issue, or not ActionScript, I'm sorry, Flashpunk might give you an issue every once in a while if you're doing this one thing that we're going to do later, but I will remind you guys what a default constructor is, so do not feel that you need to have that, you know, buried in your mind deep for you to remember. It's okay. So we're going to do, we're going to call this name, and it's going to be a string, and we are going to put a space after created, and then plus name. And over here, we're going to have to supply it. So let's create a rose and a daisy. I have to say those are fairly common flowers. So we've got rose and daisy. So yeah, it outputs the name of them, and that's pretty simple. Okay, let's say we want to delete that, and we actually want to create a method called display name. So public function display name. We're actually going to do get name because we don't want it to display it, we want to return it. So string. Now, as I said in the last tutorial, name right here is local only to this function. It doesn't exist to anything else. The class flower doesn't know about it. This function doesn't know about it. How do we get it in here so we can return it? We have to save it to a variable. So just like in main, you can create variables here. Public var, we're going to call this flower name. We're going to rename this in a minute, but you'll understand why. Okay, when I explain it. Flower name is equal to name, and we're going to return flower name down here. So now if we do trace f, okay, so before I do trace, f1 dot the period is going to let us know what we have access to. All right, and we can do get name. All right, and we can call that. Now we can either save that to a variable flower1 name, which is a string, make it equal to that, and then trace flower1 name. All right, and it says rows, or we can just plug this right in here. When you're starting programming, it's going to look weird. You can have a multitude of parentheses, and it's kind of annoying trying to get them to match up. Thankfully, Flash Develop, if you go to the right of an ending parenthesis, it'll show you the one that it's connected to, and if you go to the right of the beginning of one, it also does. So you can kind of match them up. But this should work just fine. We just ran it. I'll run it again. Okay, and then you could also do trace f2.getName. Okay. And I'm going to space these out a little bit. Okay, the thing is, we don't need this method right here. Okay, trace f1.flowerName will also work. And the reason why is it's public right here. Anybody can access it. Like, if you have access to the f1 variable, you can get a hold of flower name. You're probably thinking that's not a big deal. I'm like, whatever. Then we don't even need this function right here. We don't need get name. You're absolutely right. Now, the thing is, all right, let's say you're working on a team. Someone in main is like, I really hate that flower is a rose. I'm kind of into pizza. Oops. Flower name. Flower name 5. Okay. Now it's renamed to pizza. And you're like, well, I just hope that my teammate isn't stupid. Yeah, you can hope that they, don't make stupid mistakes, but you never know. Stuff happens. So what you can do here is you can change it from public to private. And what you can see here is that it underlines this and it says attempted access of inaccessible property flower name. So now you can't access it, which is good. We don't want anybody else to touch it. And that's not a big deal in this case, because we're the only ones working on it. I don't think you'd ever change your flower name anywhere else, or even change it to pizza, but it's something to keep in mind, and it's also the best example to explain why private exists. So private makes it exclusive to this class. Nobody else knows about it. Okay, so now if we wanted to do something along the lines of, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so right here we have flower name. Let's refactor, rename, that's just right-click, refactor, rename, and change it to name, okay? Now, I think anybody who's looking at this can probably figure out why I decided not to call this name, because it's saying name is equal to name. How does the computer know which one is which? Is this name, are we setting this name equal to this name? Are we setting this name equal to itself? Are we setting this name equal to itself? So what happens here, in this particular example, it's going to use this name, and it's just going to assign it to itself. So how do we use this class's name right here? And I actually just said the word this. Okay, if you use the keyword this, and you press the period or a dot or whatever you want to call it, you can see all of the different things that it's accessible to. This would be the same as doing F1 dot over here, except it can also get to private stuff because it is the actual flower. It knows about its secrets. So yeah, now let's do what's called refactoring and abstract this code to public function setName. And we will do name, which is a string, and we're not returning anything. And we're going to do this name equals that. SetName, name. You could also do this dot setName, but you shouldn't have to. But now the problem here is that F1 can now set the name, so we can set it back to pizza. Because our friend that's working on this game with us is absolutely into pizza. Okay, you can do the same thing that you did with private here. Pretty simple. Okay, so we're doing pretty well on time, and we've scratched the surface with classes. Now let's say that we want to create a public function pollinate. Trace pollinated the forest. Okay, so if we did f1 dot pollinate, f2 dot pollinate. Actually, let's do a little bit more. Let's do lowercase there, and then name plus pollinated. So we can see Rose pollinated forest, Daisy pollinated the forest. Okay, so now what happens if, let's say we create a rose, or not a rose, a flower that can't exist in the forest. Maybe daisies can't exist in the forest. I'm not sure. I think any common flower can exist there, but I don't do gardening. I don't know much about flowers. It's just, these are examples. So let's create a new flower. Or no, not a new flower. Let's change this to cactus. All right, that's more of a plant than a flower. But just for the example, we will continue using cactus as a flower. So, cactus pollinated the forest. Cactuses do not live in forests. So, what do we do here? We could create a second thing here. Do place, which would be a string. Or we could, well, we would also save it to a private thing up here. Or we could create a new function that says area it lives in. Or we could use it to do our next example. So we're going to create a new class, and it's going to be called cactus. Okay, and I'm going to delete this up here, don't want it. So this public class cactus is a new class, and it seems kind of useless right now, because you're like, well, we already have the flower. What we're going to do is we're going to have it extend flower. And if you really wanted to, we could also refactor this and rename it as plant. You can do that if you want. It's probably going to confuse you. So yeah, let's continue. So if we do this right now, we can actually come back here and change this to a new cactus, and then we're going to have the variable be a cactus as well. Now you'll see that it gives us an error. All right, this needs to match this. Okay, it says no default constructor found in base class.flower. And that's because we need to call the flower's constructor. So let me take a step back and fully explain what we're doing here. We are creating a child class of flower. So cactus is a flower. It extends flower. It's a type of flower, but it's not necessarily a flower. It's like an enhanced flower. It's its own type. And let's say that we were creating Mario. We'd have like public class player, and then Mario extends player, and Luigi extends player. So you can create different types of the same thing that are different enough that they need their own class rather than just plugging in a name. So now with this cactus, we need to call what's called super and plug in the name. And super takes the parent class, and in this case, it just calls its constructor. So as you can see, everything runs as normal. The name right here, cactus, gets plugged in. Now, if we're going to have a cactus, there are different types of cactuses. We could do orange cactus, or, you know, Texas cactus or something. All right, but let's say we just want this to be cactus. We don't even want a supply name because we know it's a cactus. All right, you can take this out, and instead, we're going to capitalize it this time. Let's just plug it in right there, and it still works. Cactus pollinated the forest. let's change this to capital R. Just make things simple. Okay, so now the thing is, maybe we want to change what happens in pollinate. So pollinate right here is technically a part of cactus because it inherits from flower. Now, if we made this private, cactus would no longer have access to pollinate, neither would main. This is where protected comes in. So protected means that flower knows about it, any child of flower knows about it, but other things don't, which would cause a problem here. So we're going to keep this public. But we will come back to that in a minute. So with the cactus, let's say that we want to override pollinate, it's called. Okay, and if you just do that, you write override. Okay, I typically type over, and then I hit enter, and I press space, and it has all these, and I go down to pollinate, and I hit enter again. It'll finish typing it for me, which is always a speed boost in productivity. All right, it returns void, just like the parent's pollinate function, and it calls super.pollinate. So if we did this right now, it's going to say cactus pollinated the forest. If we take out super.pollinate, you'll see that it does not do anything. All right, and that's because we're overriding it. We are basically saying, hey, don't do this, call this instead when pollinate gets called on cactus, which is flower 2. Now, you can certainly use super.pollinate, and it'll just do the original function as if there's nothing here. So you could add something extra here, like let's say cactuses can only pollinate 5 times. You could create, you don't need to type this, poll count, which is equal to 3, and then you could do poll count minus minus. All right, and you could do something like that. Or in our case, we don't want it to pollinate the forest. We want to do name. This is another problem. Name's private. We need to make it protected so cactus can get a hold of it. Pollinated the desert. Okay, so that kind of explains what child classes are, that you can override stuff. You can get access to its protected and public methods. However, private methods, private functions and variables inside Flower are private to Flower. They are not seen by the child. The child can not touch its parents' privates, is an easy way to remember it. Because that is weird. So, yeah, that's pretty much all that we're going to do. I'm just going to make a couple last comments. A variable that belongs to a class is called a property, and it'll say that down here. A function that exists in a class is called a method. So if you ever hear me say method, I'm referring to a function that belongs to a class. If I say property, it is a variable that belongs to a class. So here, the set name, the property name is being set to the variable name from the arguments list. Or rather, Flower's property name is being assigned to the argument name. So there is some terminology here. I will say it over and over again, so you don't need to worry about it remembering it now. This video is probably running a bit long, so I'm going to wrap it up. But you could also, if you wanted to, you could create another type here. And, play with that. And then I also want to have you guys try doing flower is equal to new cactus. It'll work, but it's going to act a little bit differently, possibly. And you just play with that. This is an exercise I'm going to let you do to see how things work, so you can kind of figure it out on your own and have some fun. And I highly suggest you guys create a rose class or a daisy class or your favorite flower, whatever it may be. Create a new flower, and you could even extend cactus and create new types of cactuses. So you'd have 3 levels of flower, two inherited classes, and do all sorts of fun stuff. There's so much you can do. Just play around, get used to it, have fun, and obviously the more work that you put in just screwing around with this, the better you're going to get it, and the better you're going to be later on when we get to game programming. So the next tutorial will be something along the lines of some other AS3 features that I haven't explored yet, and then it's going to be a bit of a thinking exercise. So I will see you guys in the next tutorial, and hope you enjoy this one.